Traditional Chinese medicine has long been considered a desirable alternative to Western pharmaceuticals. However, it is not without its risks for the unwary consumer. Substandard preparations not only put the patient's health at risk, they also jeopardize the reputation of TCM as a whole. Hi, I'm Tracy Poir, one of the qualified practitioners of traditional Chinese medicine at Balance Medical Supplies, and today I'd like to talk to you about some of the safety and quality issues surrounding the use of herbal patents and powders. At Balance Medical Supplies, we've done extensive research and we're proud to stock Shengfeng powders from Taiwan, which we believe to be superior in terms of quality and safety.
The first point of concern for many consumers of herbal medicines is the possibility of contamination by heavy metals. Heavy metals can occur naturally in the environment with large variations in concentration, but in modern times, anthropogenic sources of heavy metals have been introduced to the ecosystem. A Chinese study in 2003 investigated heavy metal contamination in soils and plants at polluted sites in China. The concentrations of heavy metals in the soils at the investigated sites generally exceeded the government guidelines for metals in soil. The concentrations of metals in plants also revealed the abilities of various plant species to absorb and store metals from the soil. Some plants take up such a lot of heavy metal from the earth that there is the potential for phytoremediation of metal-contaminated sites. The intake of heavy metals by pregnant or lactating women is a major concern. A Taiwanese study from 2005 showed that the consumption of traditional Chinese herbs by participating breastfeeding mothers significantly affected the body burden of lead in their infants. As practitioners of traditional Chinese medicine often prescribe herbs to women in the postpartum period, this is an important issue to be aware of. Infants and young children are especially vulnerable to the toxic contamination. For example, they're more susceptible to the effects of lead exposure because they absorb several times the percent ingested compared with adults, and because their brains are more plastic, even brief exposures may influence developmental processes. In 1998, a report by Dr. Richard Koh for the California Department of Health Services analyzed 260 products collected from Californian retail herbal stores and found that 32% contained undeclared pharmaceuticals or heavy metals. Lead, arsenic, and mercury were among the contaminants found. A 2008 study of traditional Chinese medicine materials sold in Hefei, China, showed that the cadmium content in 25.4% of the investigated samples exceeded the sanitary standard, while lead content in 7.9% of investigated samples exceeded the sanitary standard. Consumers also run the risk of ingesting pesticide residue present in substandard Chinese herbal preparations. As well as affecting the nervous, endocrine, reproductive and immune systems, pesticides can also contribute to abnormal development and may even lead to cancer. In addition to heavy metal poisoning and pesticides, pharmacological contamination is also a big concern, and it can lead to serious health consequences for patients. Any adverse effects expected from Western drugs can be predicted to be even worse from adulterated Chinese medicines due to poor ethical and manufacturing standards. You cannot be sure that the adulterant is limited to what Western medicine would consider a safe dose. Often the levels are much higher. Also, the inclusion of adulterants tends not to be labelled, increasing the risk of unexpected drug interactions. In 2002, researchers at the University of Exeter carried out a review of adulterations across 6 databases. The list of adulterants reported contains drugs associated with serious adverse effects, such as corticosteroids. In several instances, patients were seriously harmed. One report from Taiwan suggests that 24% of all samples were contaminated with at least one conventional pharmacological compound. This is one of the greatest problems facing patients who want to buy safe products, and it's also of serious concern for practitioners in terms of our reputations. Many patients are not aware of the issue, but their doctors often are. Patients frequently report that their GP is concerned about them taking Chinese herbs because of the risk of adulteration. Unfortunately, even products which are stringently tested can be tarred with the same brush. Of course, it's not just the external contamination of Chinese herbal medicines that has provoked concern in the past. The The most widely publicized renal toxicity caused by Chinese herbal medicines is aristolochic acid nephropathy, caused by aristolochic acid, which is naturally occurring in some plant species. Before the nephrotoxicity of aristolochic acid was discovered, guangfengji, which contains aristolochic acid, was a traditional Cantonese substitute for hanfengji. However, now only hanfengji is considered safe to use as it does not contain aristolochic acid. The two herbs look almost identical, so they must be tested chemically and examined microscopically to ensure that the correct species is used and that aristolochic acid is absent. Taiwan and Hong Kong have strict regulations controlling fungi. In Taiwan, granule companies must undertake random testing of their raw materials. They test 5 times, grinding their raw product down and testing it to ensure that it contains no aristolochic acid. The finished product is also tested to guarantee that it does not contain aristolochic acid. A similar situation exists with guan mutong, which in the past was used as a substitute for mutong. It has now also been discovered to contain aristolochic acid and is no longer acceptable to use. Since this discovery, most mutong available is tuan mutong, and that doesn't contain aristolochic acid. The stems and leaves of the xixin plant have also been tested and found to contain aristolochic acid, so Taiwanese manufacturers now only use the root, which is free from aristolochic acid. Also of concern to consumers of Chinese herbal products is the possibility of plasticizer contamination. Plasticizers have received worldwide attention after a huge number of food products, food additives and drinks in Taiwan were found to be contaminated in 2011. Local manufacturers illegally used DEHP in place of palm oil in emulsifiers to reduce costs, despite the fact that DEHP is classed as a probable human carcinogen by the US Environmental Protection Agency. DEHP is also known to interfere with the body's endocrine system and is a hormonally active agent. While totally banned in food, 3 plasticizers, DMP, DEP and DBP, are considered safe by the SFDA in China and are approved in drug production. According to pharmaceutical industry sources, plasticizers can be found in more than 300 kinds of medicines, including slow-release drugs, powdered drugs and film-coated tablets. These plasticizers help with the longevity, texture and appearance of the pharmaceuticals and are not considered harmful to consumers provided that their concentration is within safe limits, according to the SFDA's Information Office. There is cause for debate, however, with Wang Yuedan, who has a PhD in immunization from Peking University, pointing out that there is no standard for maximum content of plasticizers in medicines and that they could cause reproductive problems, especially in boys. Wang said that despite the fact that people take medicines infrequently and in small doses, plasticizers can still be harmful and should not be ignored by authorities. In China, GlaxoSmithKline was recently ordered to recall the antibiotic Augmentin after the SFDA found that it contained traces of a toxic plasticizer called DIDP. Safe human consumption of DIDP is not established. However, results from animal studies have shown that the liver may be affected by long-term consumption. GSK China's public relations director Zhang Saiying told the China Daily newspaper that the chemical was present in only very low amounts in the Augmentin. She says, "We can confirm that we do not intentionally use DIDP as an ingredient in Augmentin syrup. The only source of the chemical currently identifiable is the plastic lining inside the bottle cap, and further investigation is underway." If this is the case, and the plastic lining inside the bottle cap was the source of the plasticizer contamination, then it is possible for any product to be contaminated with plasticizers. Therefore, testing should be standard. There are several ways that plasticizers might find their way into products. As mentioned earlier, they may be intentionally added to drugs or illegally added into food and beverages, as was the case in Taiwan last year. Also, plasticizers can leach from plastic containers or seals, such as was seen in the tainted Augmentin in China. They can also find their way into medicines by leaching from plastic containers used during manufacturing. Last year, in the midst of the plasticizer scandal in Asia, it was found that several of Shengfeng's products in Macau contained tiny traces of plasticizers. All of the implicated products fell within the safe limits set for plasticizers in food in Taiwan. There are no maximum limits for these compounds in herbs or medicines. Shengfeng quickly launched an investigation and released a statement to confirm that they did not intentionally add any plasticizers to the products, and that since these 21 products all contained essential oils and during the extraction process they were contained in HDPE plastic containers, they assume that since essential oils are oil-soluble substances, it may be that a certain batch of plastic containers were of a low quality, causing the plasticizers contained in the plastic containers to seep out in minute amounts. They stated that in order to avoid this type of instance happening again, from now on they would only use stainless steel or glass instruments in the manufacturing process to avoid the possibility of plasticizers in the plastic containers seeping out. They recalled all of the 21 batch products in spite of the fact that they did not exceed the safe limits for foods, and they ensured that all of their products underwent testing by a third-party testing facility. You can see the results of these tests at the website at the bottom of the page here. You just need to keep on clicking through on that site and you'll eventually come to lab reports for the products, which include English. Unfortunately, the rest of the site is in Chinese. Currently, most herbal powder producers do not test for plasticizers because they do not add them intentionally to their products, but Shengfeng now tests for plasticizers as a part of their routine testing. Shengfeng is one of the only, if not the only, producers to do this, which really demonstrates their integrity and commitment to their customers. They don't limit their testing to what is prescribed by law. They're happy to go over and above the legal requirements because they feel it's necessary for patient safety. That is why Balanced Medical Supplies are proud to stock Shengfeng products. Improperly manufactured and stored herbal medicines are at risk of microbial contamination, which is also a threat to the health of the patient. Most Chinese herbal medicines are abundant in starches, lipids and proteins, which are nutrients for microbial growth. If there is no heat treatment in the manufacturing process, the dosage forms slices, pills and powders do not have appropriate storage, and therefore it is easy for microorganisms and molds to grow. Also, if stored improperly, many traditional Chinese herbs will generate aflatoxin, a hepatic carcinogen. So, when choosing a quality herbal product, look for one that does not contain any crude herb powder and is quality tested in an ISO 17025 certified laboratory. Most manufacturers of Chinese medicine concentrates grind crude herbs directly into powder and then mix in starch to add 20% or more to product weight. This leaves high levels of pesticide and heavy metal residues and exposes products to significant microbial contamination risks. This leads to potential moulding and the production of aflatoxins and other dangerous toxic byproducts. This is why you want a product that does not contain any crude herb powder.
There are a few easy ways that you can test your product to see if it contains crude herb powder, and in a moment I'm going to show you some of these. If you do these tests and your product does contain crude herb powder, then if I were you, I wouldn't bother asking any more questions about quality. I would simply start looking for a better quality product. However, if it does test clean for crude herb powder, then you'll still need to follow up with the producer and check whether they are stringently testing them in an ISO 17025 laboratory. The reason for this is that testing for crude herb powder can only give us indications about the likelihood of heavy metal contamination, microbial contamination and pesticides, things like that. It can't tell us anything at all about pharmaceutical contamination, and it can't tell us about aristolochic acid, etc., etc. So it's just the first step in your search.
One way to tell if your product contains crude herb powder is to do a burns test. Here on the left we have some crude herb powder, and on the right you have some Shengfeng herbal powder which doesn't contain crude herb powder. So we just hold a lighter there for about 10 seconds or so, and when you take it away you see that anything that contains crude herb powder will continue to smoke like it's incense. And on the right here, the Shengfeng herbal powder, hold it there for 10 seconds as well, and when you take the lighter away you'll see it doesn't smoke. Another way to tell if your product contains crude herb powder is by simply sprinkling a small amount of it into a glass of water. The product on the left is herb powder from another company, and the product on the right is going to be the same product but from Shengfeng. And you can already see the product on the left has quite a bit of crude herb powder still floating on the top. But watch as we put it in the Shengfeng herb powder. It just dissolves. There's nothing left floating there on the top. And after a good stir up, you can see that the Shengfeng product has dissolved nicely into the water, but the product on the left has tended to sink right down to the bottom. And as we lift the glass up and look underneath, you'll be able to see tiny granules of crude herb powder when it comes into focus. There you are. But let's lift up the Shengfeng product, and nope, you can't see any granules at all. So that shows that it's free of crude herb powder. Balance Medical Supplies has done the research for you and found an outstanding product that you can use with total confidence. Shengfeng is currently the only government-certified large-scale producer of crude herb powder-free Chinese medicine concentrates in Taiwan. Shengfeng products meet or exceed most national health and safety standards and are currently sold across Europe, the United States, Canada, Japan, Hong Kong, Southeast Asia and Australia. At this time, I'd like to address an issue that may seem contradictory. If Europe and the US have such high safety standards, why did they find all the contaminated products for sale there, as mentioned earlier? It's important to note that having standards and policing them are two entirely different things. Many countries do not put nearly as much money or effort into policing their herbal safety standards as one would hope. Just because a standard is in place doesn't mean that it's impossible to import substandard products, which is why you, as the buyer, must beware and request proof that the standards have been met. Shengfeng has not only passed GMP and ISO 9001-2000, but it also runs an ISO 17025 certified laboratory, and it subjects all of its products to strict quality inspections before being released to market. What are some of the advantages of Shengfeng products? All Shengfeng products are free of crude herb powder, as shown both by burns tests and examinations under a microscope. If you take a look at this, the top slides are another company's powder. The ones on the bottom are from Shengfeng. You can see a clear difference. All batches are rigorously tested. You can see here they test for microbial contamination, heavy metals, toxins of mold such as aflatoxin, pesticides, aristolochic acid. They test for pharmacological contamination, steroids, analgesics, things like that, and do a number of other general tests, one of which, the TLC test, I'll talk to you about in a minute. All Shengfeng products must at a minimum pass these pesticide and herbicide residues tests. And as I mentioned previously, Shengfeng are possibly the only producers of herbal powders to test for plasticizers, going above and beyond what is expected to ensure the safety and efficacy of their products. Here we have a sample certificate of analysis. You can see they test for heavy metals, microbial limits, aristolochic acid, and down the bottom there you have the TLC identification. I'll blow that up for you. Shengfeng uses thin layer chromatography identification to confirm exactly what is in the product. So why is this important? Well, recently it's been reported that some Chinese medicines in Australia were tested and found to have inadequate or misleading labelling. Some of them contained protected animal species, including the Asiatic black bear and the Saiga antelope. A number of these products are also available in New Zealand. Balance Medical Supplies do not import products containing animals or plants that are listed as trade restricted according to the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species legislation. Due to Shengfeng's rigorous quality control testing, we can be absolutely certain that the only ingredients in our preparations are those listed on the label. First, the raw product is examined under a light microscope to ensure that it's the right material, and then the final preparation is examined using thin layer chromatography identification. Only once this testing is done are the medicines released, giving practitioners and patients total confidence in the integrity of the product. I'd be happy to discuss any of the issues raised in this presentation or the merits of Shengfeng products, so please feel free to contact me on 0800 133 555